Hello, this video is to 2bsirus and just in general, but not really in general. 2bsirus, to you. I have sort of a challenge for you, and basically, I don't think you're taking into account things we actually all agree on, but you're just not being conscious about them as relevant to this issue, so I'll tell you what I mean. First of all, let's talk about the word space a little bit. Okay, every sense has a sense space in the sort of the mathematical metaphor of the idea of space with free variables, an orthogonal coordinate system. Okay, and so I'm talking about vision has color, and taste has flavor, and sound has tones, and so on. Okay. Now, and they don't affect each other. How red something is doesn't affect how it sounds. Okay, they're independent spaces. But they all also, well, at least some of them have what I'll call a metric space associated with them, a space of distance. Now, metric, of course, anything that can be measured is metric, and you can measure the space. So, I'm just going to call it metric space for now. So this space where we measure things in terms of their location, where we locate them, all right? Okay, I'm going to argue that that metric space is a mental thing that all senses contribute to. Now, first of all, just think about a simple example of somebody that is blind, that has always been blind. They still can have a sense of this metric space, and they can still inform it with other senses without any visual input to correlate it. They can still correlate a texture and a spatial location and a sound and so on, all in this correlated spatial world, right? Now, we tend to think of this visual space as essentially spatial, pure spatial, because we get it spatially. But I would like you to take this into account. Relates to something I mentioned in some of the other videos. When you're looking at an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with writing all over it, a diagram, I'm holding my imaginary one in landscape mode here. You can't see that whole thing at once, right? This is my point. Now, I don't know if you know this, but most of your vision in that big vision is not full color. The only full color part of your 180-degree cone of vision is a little tiny circle in the middle, roughly, twice as big, around the size of the moon in the sky. That's not very big angularly. And you can notice this effect when you look at a piece of paper. How many words can you really see at once, well enough to know what words they are, not just that they are words? It's not the whole sheet of paper, right? It's just a little tiny spot. Now, around this spot, you have cones or blue cones and rods. So that's basically two monochromatic for low light sensitivity and more high energy light sensitivity in a monochromatic way, or maybe two color. But certainly the colors we think of as colors, those are only happening in this little circle in the center, which you can only put on a little tiny quarter sized angular area on the page at once, and you are scanning that. So what I'm telling you is that our real visual space is this, like what you would think of as a bitmap, with circle here with the high def image, and then a circle outside much bigger with a much lower definition image. Okay, that's your real visual space, and that is not spatial, right? If you have just that space, when your eyes move, it looks like the world is moving, like when a camera is moving and the tape looks like it's jostling around. And we do this backflip before it gets into our mind where we're like, no, my head's moving. It's not moving, the paper's not moving. It's a solid spatial thing. But you're already looking at something that's been projected. All the textures, the sight, the smell has been projected onto this spatial sense, which is in your head, which is why I say that uses all the senses, because it's there for bioevolutionary reasons. It's like our holodeck in our head, and we have our scanners, our eyes and ears, and our chemical sensitivities. And we take all this information and we essentially paint or construct this model by painting onto this spatial sense. And it's just like I have an idea of how far the wall is behind me, just from my memory, not by looking. I can paint things on there that I've seen in the past. So I want us to take this into account when we're talking about visual dominance. And it's very important to me because we agree on the visual dominance, but see, Professor Anton wants to take it in the direction of, no, science is a visual thing. Well, no, that when you're looking at that piece of paper and it looks like, look, it's a 2D piece of paper, you're actually just doing that with a little teeny tiny 2D information, lots of spectral information, lots of shade and image processing types of information. And then you're taking that information and you're putting it on your spatial conception, which is in your head, into the shape of a paper, imagining it as a solid thing. And when you change your view on it or dart your eyes around, you don't even notice your dart in your eyes. Unless you really think, you don't even notice, and it all looks like one big gestalt, when I know from the anatomy of the eye, you're only seeing, something the size of a quarter or a 50-cent piece, a little more like a quarter, scanning around that page. And scanning around the room and taking, distance readings and putting them in your memory, in this spatial memory, painting in this spatial holodeck sense of space. And what I'm going to just say as a final thing is, if you think about the bioevolution of this, it makes a lot of sense. Every one of the senses has its own actual dedicated space of vision. Now, there is actually a little material spatial element to vision because, the retinas are in a 2D, detector. Okay. But all the senses want to get spatial information, right? But the eyes dominate a lot because of this, because they're so good at getting at this common sense of space. However, that common sense of space, blind animals have it, right? It comes from all the senses. It almost is really like the intersection of all the senses, and our whole material object model of the world comes down to the object being the thing that correlates all of our sense data. And if you think about it in our mental world, that's exactly what it has done. This pencil is my mental correlation of the texture, the color, the smell, flavor. And that's where space really comes from, right? It's not just from vision. It's just that vision happens to be highly accurate in terms of this metric space of distance measurements, length measurements. All right, so I want us to take into account this cognitive process that our brain has eyes. We can make some deductions by looking at eye anatomy, sharing our experiences of how it gets to us by the time we're, quote unquote, seeing that piece of paper as a piece of paper. Not a little circle traveling around, not just a little circle at once, but we think we're seeing all this stuff at once, even to a degree things that are behind me that I just see a lot, but not really actually right now. I want to take that into account when we're talking about these things, because, for example, I think you can see that regardless of the dominance, sight did not invent space. Science didn't invent space. Science is borrowing from these metaphors, and there is a space metaphor beyond vision. And if you don't see it, it's just because you're still visually dominated. Start thinking about flavor space, right? Start thinking about sonic space and Fourier space. Start thinking about texture maps, right? Get yourself out of your visual dominance by taking some of the metaphors from the visual sense, like the word image, and applying it to other senses until you get a grok of how image really is a generalized thing. So you can have a taste image And when you remember a flavor, that's the taste image that you're recollecting, just like when you remember a picture that was taken of you as a child. Okay, a sonic image, right? These tactile images. All right, cheers. I'd like to have groups based on subjects, right? So like a free will group with everybody pro or con that likes to talk about the given subject. That's probably the real kind of group that I'm interested in terms of, okay, self-ascribing, I'm in this group. I'm willing, I don't want to be in a group so much that says I'm pro or con. I want to be in a group that says I think it's an important subject. All right, cheers. This would be one of them. Great stuff.